Welcome back, guys. I'm going to talk about the Southeast Division right now. I'm going to start with the Atlanta Thrashers and lead it off with the Staples. First guy I want to talk about is going to be Nick Antropov. Last year, put up pretty good points, 67 points from a team that's extremely thin on offense, and somehow, it's beyond any reasonable explanation, this guy managed to be a plus 13 by the end of the year. He's going in the 10th round, and he's a really good value. He's got one more year of experience as a leader on the team, and he's got a bunch of young talent around him, which is another year developed. So look for big things from him from the 10th round. Another guy is Tobias Enstrom. Keep an eye on him. He's like a poor man Sergei Gonchar, 50-plus point potential, good plus-minus, but he can be had 6 rounds later than the top defenseman. Zach Bogosian is going inside the top 100 in recent drafts, and I think it's a little bit of a stretch, especially considering a guy like I just spoke about in Tobias Enstrom is going about 2 rounds later than that. Yeah, Bogosian's shown about a 40-point potential, plus 20 upside as well, but there's a lot of depth in the 9th and 10th round, and I'm going to reach for a higher upside, higher offensive output type of guy at that point in the draft. Chris Mason is another guy I'm going to try and avoid. In the last 2 seasons, he's maintained about 30 wins, 2.5 goals against average, and .915 save percentage. However, the last 3 seasons in Atlanta, their goalies specifically have averaged about 20 wins, a 3.0 goals against average, and a .900 save percentage with almost no shutouts. So he's basically only got about one solid stat that you're going to get, which is going to be a save percentage. It's all you can count on, and there's a pretty good backup in Pavlovich also in Atlanta. So I'm not going to take a risk on a guy like that, especially considering where he's getting drafted in the 10th round. It's around the 26th goalie overall. So if you're thinking about it in terms of a 12-team league, that's a 3rd-string goalie you're going to be drafting in a range where you've got still a lot of high upside offensive players and defensive, just skaters all around on the board. Brian Little is not yet 24 years old and has a 30-goal season under his belt. So why he's going in late rounds and undrafted is completely beyond me. He's a solid sleeper, he's got lots of upside, and he may end up playing on a line with Antropov and Evander Kane this year, which would be a real dangerous situation for defenses and goalies all over the Southeast Division. Another guy also as a steal late in rounds, but you shouldn't rely too much on, is Rich Peverly. He's got pretty good production coming out in the last round or possibly being on waivers, and he's a solid bench filler to put up some fantasy points when you need the odd game here and there. The main sleeper and steal that I want to talk about though from Atlanta is Evander Kane. Now, last year he showed some signs of brilliance, but really was being overwhelmed by the size and the speed in the league. Then, April 10th, 2010, and the Matt Cook incident. Now if you don't know what I'm talking about, click on this link right here. In about 5 seconds, this guy completely changed the entire league's perception of him and became a hero by virtually avenging the entire league from Cook's never-ending shenanigans. So basically, I'm thinking this year, the whole league is going to smarten up, give him the space he deserves, because otherwise, as you just saw, he's going to take it by force. Eric Stahl is a really good bet to put up 40 goals this year and near point per game production. The last 2 years, despite the ups and downs of his team, he's managed to stay on the plus side of the plus-minus as well, which is a really good sign. I'm looking for him, especially if Carolina has one of their upswing years, goes on another cup run like they've been doing in alternating seasons. I'm thinking he should be an all-star, no questions this year. Cam Ward as well should be having a really good season. Now in his whole career he hasn't put up spectacular stats, especially not in the goals against average or the wins category. But the one thing I've been watching is that every single year since the beginning of his NHL career, he's had an increase in save percentage. So that's a really good sign to me. I'm thinking if they have a good season, about 35 wins, 2.5 goals against average, and a plus .915 save percentage. So somewhere in line with the 08-09 season. Another bet, a good bet to have, is going to be any of the 3 defensemen between Gleason, Corvo, or Pitkinen. Now these guys are going to be 4th defensemen. They're going to be fillers, but they all have pretty good offensive upside, and I would say they're a solid plug-in as a 4th defenseman on a championship-style team. The last couple of years, countless fantasy managers have coined Eric Cole as a bounce-back candidate and a huge sleeper. I'm not buying into it. I think this guy is done, and I'm not going to waste a late-round sleeper pick on a has-been like this. So there's too much high upside in youth and too many good sleepers this year. Just let this guy go. Pass it on the left-hand side. UC Jokinen should be looked at as a real good bargain in the 15th to 16th round. He started off his career a bit slow, putting up 30 to 40 point seasons, but I'd say it's a pretty good bet that he's found a comfortable home in Raleigh after putting up 65 points last year. Another guy is going to be Brandon Sutter. This guy's going to get all the opportunity he can handle this year to develop into the promise that he's shown. Alongside with him is going to be Zach Boychuk. Now, if either of these two can emerge, and especially if they end up playing side by side, are both considerable sleeper options in the late rounds. Thomas Vokoun has carried countless teams to victory over his entire career since joining the NHL. The most impressive fact is that in the last 3 years that he's played in Florida, this guy's maintained a mid-2s goals against average, just over 26 wins, 6 shutouts, and a ridiculous save percentage, maintaining it above .920. Now I'm thinking that this year he's going to put up a really solid year. Florida could take a step forward, and I'm looking for him to repeat what he's been doing. Third round is a good value, especially considering the goalies going ahead of him. The only thing that separates them is the fact that their teams have a higher offensive ability. Now, Stephen Weiss and David Booth are also two guys to keep an eye on, and they're both going to put up similar numbers, the only real difference being their position eligibility. I'm thinking about 60 to 65 points is a sure lock for these type guys. There's not much more upside than that unless Frolik can somehow blow up this season, but I'd say they're pretty solid picks in the 9th, 10th rounds. Brian McCabe in the 8th round is a bit of a stretch in my books. The only reason or possible explanation I can come up with for this is the addition of Dennis Wideman to the Panthers, and people believing that somehow he's going to bring the cabaret dimension back to McCabe's game. I'm not betting on it, and there's too many forwards with high upside, guys like Matt Duchene or the before-mentioned Stephen Weiss or David Booth, and I'm going to take a gamble on one of those guys instead because I think that there's a lot more bang for the buck. Dennis Wideman in the 16th round is a good pickup. Michael Grabner in the 20th round is a pretty decent pickup as well. But the real steal in Florida is going to be Michael Frolik in the last round or going undrafted. A lot of people have forgotten about him. He's put up 2 40-point seasons, but he's got first-line duties, first-line power play, playing alongside Booth and Horton, and this year has a real good possibility to get into their point range, about 60 to 65 points, except he's going 10 rounds later than the two guys I just mentioned. Big value there. Another guy to keep an eye on is Dmitry Kulikov. He jumped from the draft straight into the NHL roster last season as a 19-year-old, put up a respectable plus-minus, some responsible defensive play, and showed 30-plus point potential. So that's pretty good value considering that that's the same, more or less the same numbers that you're going to get from a defenseman that usually you're going to take 5 or 6 rounds earlier than that. Steven Stamkos backhanded naysayers last year by posting up 50-goal season and plus 90 points. He's a top 5 pick this year, but not the consensus number 3 pick as everyone's been touting him. I see that there's a real significant argument for Malkin or Backstrom possibly going in that spot. Main reason I say this is Tampa Bay's defense is not solid enough for Stamkos to improve upon his plus-minus, and overall he's a negative defensive player, so his whole plus-minus is basically relying on how much time he can spend in the offensive zone. I think he puts up a similar line to last year. There's 0 complaints about that, so pick him with whatever spot you think, 3 to 5. Martin St. Louis is a guy who's averaged just under 90 points a season over the last 4 years. The other thing on top of this, which makes it ridiculous, is the fact that he hasn't missed a single game while doing it. He's going in the late 2nd round, winger eligible. I personally would reach for him a few spots earlier than he's been going. He's a solid bet. A lot of guys have been hesitant with him because he's turning 35, but with no signs of wear and tear, I'd feel real comfortable drafting him. Vinny Lecavalier got his contract, then got insulted by Tampa Bay Lightning, trying to move him before that contract even kicked in. Then Stamkos blew up on the scene, bumping Vinny to 2nd-line duties. I'm going to bump him too, from about the 3rd round to the 5th round on my draft board. About 65 to 70 points is really the ceiling that all you can expect from this guy, and I'm not being sold on this being reunited with his fellow Quebecer and Simon Gagne. Even Gagne is a bad pick in the 8th round. This guy's proved nothing other than to be as durable as fine china. I'm going to stay away from these two guys and roll the dice on some more quality, more proven and dependable players. Pavel Kabina should be considered quite a good steal in the 14th round. He's put up 40-plus points, is a sure bet to do it again, and is reasonably responsible on defense. Now surrounded by guys like Martin St. Louis and Steven Stamkos, getting first-line power play duties, I think he puts his cannon of a shot to good use and adds more to his point totals than he has in the past. Steve Downey is an even better steal, going undrafted or in the late rounds in most leagues. Last year after New Year's, he put up 30 points in the second half of the season, which puts him on pace for about 50 to 60 points. Add that up with 200 plus penalty minutes, and you've got a guy in the mold of David Clarkson and Scott Hartnell, winger eligible, with even a higher upside in point production than those two guys. I don't even have to throw out stats to support taking Ovechkin first, Backstrom in the top 5, or Mike Green as the first defenseman off the board. These are guys that if they come up in the draft, take them gladly and build your entire team around these incredibly valuable building blocks. Now, if I have to make a case for any one of these guys to go in that first round, then you should probably be staying as far away from fantasy hockey as you possibly can. One staple that I'm going to throw out stats for is Brooks Lake, though. He's going in the 13th round, sometimes a little later than that. He can almost fit into the sleepers and steals category because this guy's going to put up 60 points, a solid plus-minus, and really, along with other guys in Washington, you can bet that there's not a single risk to worry about when you're taking a guy in the top 6 forwards in Washington Capitals. The Washington Capitals don't have too many players in the pass-it-on-the-left category, so I'm going to go a little bit of a stretch and call out Semyon Varlamov in the 6th round. I personally can't wrap my head around 18 goalies flying off the board in the first 6 rounds, but if they do happen to be leaving the top shelf that quick, I would use your own discretion, because personally I think there's too much offensive output in an area like that, in that range in the draft, that I wouldn't waste it on a goalie, especially that far down the draft board, or down the depth chart of goalies. Thomas Fleischmann is on a 1-year, $2.6 million deal to try and cement his status as a solid top 6 forward in the NHL. Last year he put up 51 points while missing 13 games, and if he plays a full season, he's a sure bet to hit 60-point threshold. 30 goals and 30 assists is about the range that he should be notching, and that's a solid steal going in the late rounds. But a lot of guys are going to be reaching a few rounds ahead of that, but I'm still going to drop him in this category. Another guy who should be in the staples category, but I'm going to throw into the steals category, is Alexander Semin. Semin, in the last 2 seasons, has missed 29 games combined and still managed to finish in the top 15 players in each year. He's never managed a full season, but if you project his stats from the last 2 seasons over an 82-game year, he put up 100 points with 35 power play points and a plus 40 range per season with more than 300 shots a year. Full season at him will land him in the top 3 in production without a question, and he's a massive steal and should be drafted somewhere in the early 2nd round.